Bueno, bienvenidos a la conferencia número 45 de la Cátedra de Estudios Judíos Moses Mendelssohn de la Universidad de Buenos Aires. Hoy tenemos el placer de contar con la participación de un verdadero estudioso, scholar del pensamiento judío contemporáneo y de la historia judía contemporánea, más exactamente del área que se suele denominar modernidad temprana. Se trata del profesor Alan Verskin. El doctor Alan Verskin es Samuel Sachs Professor of Jewish History at the University of Toronto. Su más reciente libro es Diario de un Mesías Judío Negro, el diario del siglo XVI de David Reubeni a través de África, el Medio Oeste y Europa. Em, entonces, sin dilación, les dejamos con el doctor Verskin. Y bueno, doctor Verskin, I grant the floor to you.
Thank you.
Ahora lo hago.
Thank you so much, Professor Dreisig, for inviting me. And my apologies for speaking in English. I'm going to speak a little slower than I usually do, hopefully, so that the subtitles work better. The story that I'm going to tell today is about David Reubeni. And the story has all the makings of a work of fiction, a Netflix series, but it is entirely factual. And we know that it is factual because we hear about David Reubeni from his Jewish friends, from his Jewish enemies, from his Christian friends, and his Christian enemies. And there's a fair amount of documentation about him, so that is what this is based on. When do we first hear about David Reubeni? He shows up in Venice in 1524. People in Venice describe him as a black man who was covered in scars, came penniless with no money whatsoever, and spoke fluent Hebrew and Arabic. And as I'm sure you know, speaking Hebrew was an oddity in the 16th century. Hebrew was widely used as a literary language, but definitely not as a language of conversation. And Reubeni told the following story. He said that he was a Jewish general from a land where his brother was king, and that land had some 300,000 Jews, and it was defended by fierce Jewish tribal warriors from the lost tribes, including himself. I've translated his name as David Reubeni. Perhaps it is better translated as David the Reubenite, David from the lost tribe of Reuben. And where was this fantastic 300,000 person Jewish kingdom that somehow no one had ever heard of? It was in Arabia. It was in the heart of Arabia near Mecca. And Reubeni said that he had traveled all the way from Arabia to Europe. He traveled through Nubia in Africa. He'd gone to Egypt. He'd gone to the Holy Land. And finally, he'd ended up in Europe because he had messages from his land, special messages for Jews, and also special messages for Christian rulers. And for reasons that I'm going to get into, Reubeni was very successful at conveying those messages to Christian rulers. He got audiences before the Pope, before the King of Portugal, before the King of France and the Holy Roman Emperor. Now, the other group of people, other than rulers, who were very interested in David Reubeni were the conversos. These were Jews who had been compelled in varying degrees to force conversions to Christianity. And many of these conversos, when we see their accounts, embraced Reubeni as the Messiah. Reubeni publicly denied that he was the Messiah, but it is my view that he must have been doing something to get that kind of attention and that kind of appellation. Later, Reubeni was joined by a man named Solomon Molcho, who was a former converso, and Solomon Molcho did claim to be the Messiah. He claimed to be the Messiah, son of Joseph. So there's this atmosphere of messianic expectation that surrounds Reubeni wherever he happens to go. And to spoil the story, eventually Reubeni is dragged in front of the Inquisition, and he meets his fate in 1538. It's quite possible he was burned at the stake, although there is some room for thinking that he managed to be pardoned and went on his own quiet way. But we definitely do not hear anything about him after 1538. So this is just a slide to show you the various people that he contacted or tried to contact. He met with the Pope. He tried to meet the Ottoman Empire, and perhaps Solomon Molcho did. He went with letters to David II of Abyssinia. He met with the King of France and with the King of Portugal and the Holy Roman Emperor. So it's quite a story. And to top it off, which is really a gift for historians, we also have David Reubeni's own memoir. And the way I like to look at this memoir is that it is a how-to book. It is a guide on how to be a Messiah, how to network, how to schmooze, how to fundraise among classy people, and how to find good help when so many of the people who would be willing to engage in this very risky endeavor are probably a bunch of weirdos. They're probably people who do not have much going for them in their own lives. And what I found interesting, the diary was really my entry point into the David Reubeni story. And what I found interesting about the diary was that it was such a seamless mixture of absurd stories, which couldn't possibly be true, along with very real stories about hard-nosed people who are squabbling and bargaining in reality. So this blend of the absurd and the very boring everyday details was something that intrigued me. Just to give you an idea of the nature of those boring everyday details, the diary ends with a price list, concretely telling readers how much it's going to cost if you want to be a Messiah. How much is it going to cost to throw the fancy parties that you'll need to throw? How much it's going to cost to bribe particular officials? What to give a bishop who you need to bribe, for example. So that's what I mean by concrete information alongside all of that absurdity. So that was my entry point. You have an exciting story of a general of a Jewish army from a Jewish kingdom that speaks Hebrew, fierce Jewish warriors who speak Hebrew, along with a very real story of what it's like to be among Jews in early modern Europe and in the royal courts. So what got Reubeni these audiences? For Christians, he provided the following incentive. He said that he wanted just a few ships loaded with weapons to take back home to his Arabian kingdom. And he promised them that he would use the ships and weapons in order to set up a second front against the Ottomans in order to help the Christians against their Muslim enemies. To Jews, he promised something a little different. He promised to restore them by force to the Holy Land, to create a kingdom for them, and to restore their Jewish pride. Okay. So when I first read the diary, I thought, how could anyone possibly believe this? But when I looked into it, I saw that Reubeni was probably the most well-known Jew of the 16th century. And I really welcome people to challenge me on that. Yes, there are many famous rabbinic authorities, but none of them were of the 16th century, but none of them were known so widely geographically, and none of them were known to both Christians and Jews in the way that Reubeni was known. So the fact that he had such broad recognition pointed out to me that there was something about the 16th century that I didn't get. If I dismissed it just as a weird story, I wouldn't understand why so many people found him appealing. And that's what I'm going to talk about here. It's the making of a Black Jewish Messiah. What drew people to this very unusual character? So the first general remarks I should make about the 16th century is that it's a very dramatic period of history. There are major earthquakes, there are plagues, there are pitched battles with disastrous impacts on cities like Rome. The sacking of Rome is in 1527. It's also an age where Europeans discover a whole new world on the other side of the ocean, a place with more gold and silver than existed in all of Eurasia. And they discovered in the process of that there were sophisticated, impressive civilizations like those of the Aztecs that they hadn't dreamt existed. So the landscape of the world is changing in the early 16th century, late 15th century. There are also major changes that are happening in the old world. The centuries-old kingdoms of Muslim Spain are disappearing and finally completely disappear in 1492. There's the Spanish Inquisition and the forced conversions of and dislocations of thousands of Muslims and Jews. And then there are changes that happened a little earlier. In 1453, there's the collapse of the Byzantine Empire. And with the collapse, the disappearance of one of the oldest constants of history unto that point, one of the most important geographical divisions that had existed for about a millennium, was swept away. And so in the light of all of this turmoil and change, Muslims and Christians and Jews all thought that they were living in a life-changing period. There were very widespread apocalyptic beliefs. We embrace this period as the early modern period, as a kind of a new beginning. But for anyone living through it at the time, people felt that they were hurtling towards the end of time as they knew it. And all of that plays into the reception that David Reubeni gets. Okay. Just a funny newspaper title. So one place to begin the story is with Columbus, Christopher Columbus. 1492 is this banner year for many reasons. The Christian conquest of the Nasrid Kingdom of Granada is completed. Jews are expelled from Spain, and Columbus sets sail. And all of these events are related. There's a lot of evidence pointing to the fact that Columbus justified his voyage on the grounds that he was setting out to find a person known as the Grand Khan. The Muslims in Spain had been defeated, but there were still Muslims in the Ottoman Empire who posed a very great threat to the Christian kingdoms of Europe. And if you were a betting person in the early 16th century and you saw both sides armed for war between them, and you were to bet which would win, you would do well to bet on the Ottomans. They have much greater military superiority, and Christian rulers knew that, and they searched for allies, any allies that they could find against this great Ottoman threat. And that seems to be the way Columbus justified his voyage. He said he was searching for the Grand Khan, a ruler who was not Christian, but who lived adjacent to the Muslim world and hated Muslims, and might just have an affinity for the Christians of Europe. And where did Columbus get that idea? There were two sets of medieval legends. One was the legend of the Grand Khan, this non-Christian, non-Muslim ruler who might prefer Christians to Muslims because his kingdom bordered Islamic kingdoms. The other one was Prester John. We get this legend as early as the 12th century. It certainly lasts well into the 16th, perhaps even into the 17th century. And Prester John was a Christian ruler, was imagined as a Christian ruler who lived somewhere adjacent to the Muslim world in the medieval period, perhaps in India, perhaps in Africa. Whoops, sorry, I went too far. Now, when Christians have legends like this, you can bet that Jews have parallel legends. Christians are searching for a mythic ruler who might help them against this huge external threat. So Jews are going to imagine some kind of ruler or people who are going to help them in their battles against some kind of threat. And for Jews, it's not Prester John, it's the lost tribes. So Jews hang on to this hope that somewhere in the unknown parts of the world are the remnants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. That's those who were exiled from the kingdom of Israel in 722 BCE. A very long time ago. Even in the Talmud, the rabbis debate as to whether these tribes are ever to be seen again. But in the medieval period, because Christians are having these kinds of discussions, Jews are having them as well. And they wonder how those apocalyptic battles are going to be fought. Could they really be fought by European Jews who lack military experience? Or perhaps there's a group of much stronger Jews hanging out somewhere in the unknown world who can assist them in that crucial time that they feel that they're living in. So those are the Christian legends, the legends of Prester John, the Grand Khan, and those are the Jewish legends, the legends of the lost tribes. Then in the 16th century, there's an event which, or really the end of the 15th century, there's a series of events which change the way those legends are seen. The Portuguese are exploring Africa, and they discover that there is, in fact, a Christian kingdom in Africa, a Christian civilization in Africa, and that it had a Christian king, Emperor David II, and you can see his picture over there. And so they reasoned, the legends that they had been telling for centuries about Prester John actually were true. Prester John was this man, Emperor David II. And so Christians start believing that Prester John's kingdom is in Africa. And when Christians shift their focus, Jews do too. And where are the lost tribes to be found at this point? Also in Africa, sometimes fighting the Prester John's troops of Africa. Okay. So imagine how Reubeni appears in this environment. He appears in a Jewish community, and he claims to have been journeying from the Holy Land to Egypt to what's now Sudan through Arabia. He tells everyone that he is from the tribe of Reuben, which has been lost from a Jewish kingdom that nobody has ever heard of. a kingdom where there are Jewish warriors, where there's even a Sanhedrin, a great Jewish court, such that hasn't been seen in about 1500 years. It seems like an absurd story, but bearing in mind what we've said, is it really? Reubeni's black skin was often commented upon both by his friends and by his enemies. It made him look unlike any Jew Christians of Europe had ever seen. But wasn't the same the case with Emperor Dawit II of Abyssinia? People looking at him could point to the same thing which just happened with this newly discovered Christian kingdom in Africa. Reubeni comes from an area, he says, in Arabia, which had the central Arabia, which had no proven Jewish population, but again, wasn't much the same true of Emperor Dawit II, an area that people thought was similarly free of any Christians. Reubeni claims that he was from a mighty Jewish civilization that somehow no one had ever heard of. But bearing in mind the discoveries of Hernan Cortes in Africa, in the New World, his discoveries of these great cities in Mexico, wasn't it better for people at the time to hold off their disbelief and say, perhaps there are civilizations that exist, but that we haven't yet heard of or encountered? So that's what I have to say about Reubeni's why Reubeni had an appeal. It was an age of uncertainty, and he took advantage of all of those uncertainties, those geographical uncertainties that people had. Okay. Now to his audience. Reubeni stays with the King of Portugal for about a year. And this king is not friendly to Jews. He's banned the practice of Judaism in his kingdom. And yet he allows Reubeni's troop of very proud practicing Jews to stay there for a year and openly practice Judaism. How is it that is able to happen? So Reubeni's message to the Portuguese is the following. He wants them to give him ships loaded with weapons for him to take to the port of Jeddah. That's the city in modern-day Saudi Arabia. It's a Red Sea port city. And he says it's going to be transported from Jeddah to his Jewish tribal warriors. On the face of it, it seems completely absurd. But when one looks into it, one sees how brilliant Reubeni is in playing to the strategic interests of the Portuguese. The Portuguese, when they heard the word Jeddah, immediately thought of the Red Sea, and they desperately wanted control of the Red Sea. At the time, it was controlled by the Ottomans. Why? The Portuguese had colonies in India. The best way of making those colonies profitable was to be able to get the goods back there to Europe. And the Red Sea route would be probably the most convenient way of accomplishing that. So they were interested in the Red Sea for purely commercial reasons. This was also a period where the Portuguese court was saturated in millenarian thinking. And there were many in the Portuguese court, particularly João III's father, who thought that the destiny of the Portuguese was to be able to conquer Mecca and defeat all of the Muslims. And so when Reubeni says that his kingdom is in that vicinity, it immediately makes him of interest to the Portuguese, who have both commercial and religious interests in that particular area. The Portuguese obsession with conquering Mecca stretches back before Reubeni appears on the scene in the 1520s. Over here, I have a text by Afonso de Albuquerque, where it's from 1513, and he is talking about a vision that he had while on a ship at the Red Sea. And this is what he says. One day, we saw a very long and wide ray of light pass through the sky. It was not a star, but was like a thunderbolt, and it emanated from the land of Prester John, extending some distance across the sky and falling on the lands of Jeddah and Mecca. The Moors have a prophecy that Prester John will feed his horses and elephants in the house of Mecca and will bring about its destruction. Our entry into the Red Sea was thus a great blow to them. So you look at the imagery here. What is the dream about? It is about the fact that the Portuguese desperately want to conquer Mecca. They want control of the Red Sea. They know they can't go it alone. So there is going to be some nearby kingdom, the Christian kingdom in Abyssinia, that is going to help them out. And this isn't just a pipe dream. In 1517, the Portuguese arrange a siege of the port of Jeddah, and they're only beaten back because the Ottomans bring their forces from a newly conquered Egypt and chase them out of there. So there are these millenarian fantasies which have very concrete political consequences. A real siege happens as a result of those kinds of millenarian images. Okay. So the general point that I'm making so far is that if Christians are thinking about something, Jews tend to be thinking about it as well. If Christians are imagining help from the kingdom of Prester John, some imaginary Christian kingdom, then Jews are going to have some kind of imaginary mythic group that they're going to be seeking help from. If Christians think the end of time is going to happen at Jeddah with a siege of Mecca, Jews are going to think the same. And I have an example here from a Kabbalist, Avraham ben Eliezer Halevi. And Avraham ben Eliezer Halevi has a similar vision to Albuquerque, but with a kind of a twist. I'm going to read it here. He says, Gadia, by which he means Jeddah, is a town in the east near Mecca. They named it so in order to associate themselves with the strength and might of the biblical sons of God. So here are the lost tribes in the image. After Sultan Selim the Grim conquers Egypt, the butchers, that's the Ottoman ruler, the butchers who bow down before idols, that is the Portuguese, will enter the lands of the east near Mecca. Then they will be routed. The Portuguese who came to do battle will weaken, the Turks will rejoice, the Turks will feign to flee inland, the Edomites will follow, and the Turks will ambush them. So this is a fascinating passage here. What does it show us? It shows us that Jews are very familiar with the political ambitions of the Portuguese, and they envision a situation which is a little bit different. That the Ottomans are going to know about the Portuguese obsession with Mecca. They're going to use that obsession to lure the Portuguese in to Mecca. And then once they're on land in Arabia, they're going to ambush them and destroy their forces. So this is the kind of the twin image to the Albuquerque vision, but this is one in which the Muslims win, not the Christians. And there are many similarities in the work of in the work of Avraham ben Eliezer Halevi to it's talking about this situation. Moti ben Melech has written about this, and much earlier Umberto Cassuto has written about this, but it kind of demonstrates a parallel thinking. So why is a Kabbalist writing in this way? Why is a Kabbalist talking in these concrete political terms? The reason, I think, is that the situation for Jews in the early 16th century is growing quite bleak. Charles V has a global empire. His empire has territories in the Old World and in the New World. He's the grandson of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. And there are real worries at the beginning of Charles V's reign that he is going to extend the policies of expulsion of Jews of his grandparents. Now, that doesn't ultimately happen. Charles V's reign is relatively benign, but in the 1520s, it doesn't look that way, and some expulsions do occur, particularly from territories in the Netherlands. So Jews are facing those kinds of threats, and I think that makes them they really think that there's going to be nowhere for them to flee if Charles V gets his way at that period, and it makes them more open to unusual solutions to their problems, like those posed by Reubeni. Okay. I think the other point to bear in mind is that the Ottomans were not regarded as the bad guys. Avraham ben Eliezer is very, very willing to countenance an Ottoman victory. And again, we have precedent in Jewish thought for this. Isaac Abarbanel has this remarkable passage where he says, "It is quite possible that the Messiah will first appear in the land of the Ishmaelites. And who knows whether a king of Ishmael will not accept the religion of Israel and bring about the salvation of Israel and be an anointed one, as in the case of the king of Persia, Cyrus. About him, it is said that the fruit of blessing is in Ishmael, upon whom he will sprout." So this is a very debated passage within Abarbanel's writings. But he sees some kind of messianic role for the Ottomans. And he knows that they control the Holy Land, but he doesn't seem to think that is an obstacle to Jewish messianic aims. So where does Reubeni stand on this? Reubeni is very cryptic. The secret to being, I think, a successful Messiah is that you have charisma, and you allow people to project whatever they hope the Messiah is supposed to be onto you. So to the Christians, he says he's on their side. It seems unlikely that he would have said that to his Jewish audiences, given that there was a strong preference among his followers for Ottoman over Christian rule. But again, he does keep silent so that he can get the maximum number of followers, each thinking that he is representing their vision. So I am running out of time, I think, a little bit. So I want to just go briefly with some of his followers, just to follow up on that theme of him appealing to multiple audiences. I'm going to skip that. Women. If you read Reubeni's diary, there are a huge number of important female figures who support him, who are philanthropists, who provide him with money and provide him with various other things. I found this interesting because Reubeni has a very monkish personality. He's an ascetic. He is always fasting. He never has sexual relations, even though many of his followers clearly do in the diary. And one normally associates monkishness with a kind of a misogyny, that women are the root of temptation, so therefore they should be avoided. But Reubeni doesn't do that. He has many non-sexual close relationships with women. He actively solicits their advice. For example, in one family, the Pisas in Rome, he talks about their advice. He talks about not following their advice. He regrets not following their advice. He speaks of their wisdom, and so on and so forth. So he's able to get those elite women. He also has women that he depicts in more traditional roles, serving food, treating him when he's ill, and so on and so forth. He seems to have both of these relationships with women. Women as sort of caregivers. So in Question as period, I can go into that in more detail, but it's an interesting feature of the book that he has such a large and appreciative female audience. The other major audience that's probably the single biggest group who are fans of Reubeni are the conversos. And the term refers to Jews who were converted to Christianity under various degrees of compulsion. And I think that the essential thing to know about conversos is that there is no uniformity in their views. Some are sincere Christians. Some are crypto Jews who are only outwardly Christian and and fully practice Judaism to the extent they can in private. And there are a lot who are in between. I think that there is religious syncretism. But if there is a constant, it's that very, very many of them think that they're living in apocalyptic times. They entertain a wide variety of messianic scenarios. And at least the ones that we know of who interacted with Reubeni seem to have embraced him as the Messiah, particularly those in Portugal. They clung onto Reubeni as their hope to return to Judaism. They were the group who was harmed most by Reubeni. The Inquisition was not yet in Portugal. Is officially introduced to Portugal in 1536, and documents suggest that one of the major reasons for it being instituted in Portugal was the fact that Reubeni had shown how tenuous the commitment of the conversos of Portugal was to Christianity. So he ended up bringing quite a fair amount of harm to that community, at least in Portugal. The other figure who I don't have much time to talk to is Diogo Pérez, who is renamed Solomon Molcho. He becomes Reubeni's most important disciple. He sees Reubeni in Portugal. He's a converso. He was a Christian from birth. Amazingly, he was able to write in fluent Hebrew and had extensive knowledge of Jewish sources. He's a real scholar. He's inspired by Reubeni. He asks Reubeni to circumcise him. Reubeni says, no, go somewhere else. Don't disturb my mission. And he does. And eventually they reunite and they go to the Holy Roman Emperor and eventually to their death. So this Molcho is an important figure. He writes a lot of Kabbalistic books, some of which are still studied today. And he was very widely admired by rabbis of the period, including Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, who writes in his diary that he wishes he too could die a martyr like Shlomo Molcho. So this is an example of one of those converso figures. And finally, Reubeni is able to woo a lot of what I would call very practical Jews. So the de facto head of Rome, of the Jews of Rome at the time, is Daniel de Pisa. He is the head of a bank. He is one of these Jewish super elites of the period, a family that's vastly wealthy, but is a very pragmatic family. I mean, they're bankers. And the de Pisas use their vast wealth for philanthropy. And the biggest problem of the age is how to resettle all of these Jews who are fleeing from Iberia. When we look at the situation in retrospect, and often the way it's told in history books, we see the transfer of Jews from Iberia to the Ottoman Empire is a relatively smooth one. You know, Sephardic culture blossomed in the Ottoman Empire afterwards. But that did not look that way in the 1520s. There was still a lot of uncertainty. It was not clear where all of those refugee Jews, some of whom had been taken captives, would go. And the de Pisa family used their considerable wealth to help in those efforts to resettle those Jews. And however wealthy they weren't wealthy enough to resettle all of them. And I think that that's why these very rational people turned towards Reubeni, because they felt that their situation was desperate and that the only way they could to save these fleeing Jews was through this unorthodox strategy that Reubeni had. So just to conclude, and I feel like I've only really scratched the surface of Reubeni here. Reubeni's story made sense to a lot of different kinds of people. It made sense to the De Pisas. In the light of the desperateness of the situation of these fleeing Iberian Jews, it made sense to people that a vast Jewish kingdom of Jews could exist in Arabia, bearing in mind all of the new geographical discoveries that were being made. It made sense to Jews given the ascendancy of Charles V and the worries about his plans to expel them. It made sense to European rulers, given the ascendant power of the Ottomans and the need to find an extra political force to counteract them. And I think that it made sense to Iberian Jews and conversos because their situation in the 1520s was very, very desperate. And they felt that God would redeem them now, and that they had to begin that work of redemption, that preparatory work of redemption themselves. So thank you, and I'm pleased to welcome any questions.
Aplaudimos.
Oh, I have one question from Yehonatan. Thank you, and this is great. I've corresponded with Yehonatan, but I've never spoken to him. So we know it from a number of sources. We have an Italian diplomat who is sent really to spy on David Reubeni in Venice. And he is a diplomat who actually had seen Abyssinians. So he knew what they looked like. And when you see the word black or somebody being described as black within an early modern document, you cannot be certain what that means. It could mean somebody from sub-Saharan Africa, and it could just as easily mean, I don't know, someone with a tan, really. There's no way of knowing it. But this Italian diplomat says, in my opinion, he looks like he calls them the Indians of Prester John, by which he means the Abyssinians. We have a bunch of descriptions of Reubeni from Jewish sources. One of the terms that's used is shachar chor. And that is a term which only appears in the Bible once. And there's a big, in Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, and there's a debate among the commentators, as I'm sure you're aware, as to what shachar chor means. Does it mean intensifying the blackness or reducing the blackness? There's this ambiguity because it appears only once that you can't know which way it is. So we don't know why he's referred to in that way. I think it's likely that the authors who use that term are using it to, in some way, distinguish Reubeni from Black non-Jewish Africans, but still designate that that there's some kind of relation. So it's a hard question to know, but we do have multiple sources where he is described as black, or meaning it appears dark-skinned.
La Sulamita, de Sulamita. A ver, ¿alguna otra pregunta?
Ahí, Guillermo Jakubowicz, si quiere.
Guillermo.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Professor Alan. This was really great. I learned a lot and looking forward to reading your book. I'm
Thank
going to
you.
order it today.
Oh, thank you.
Really. It was a great surprise. Thanks to my dear friend Pablo for bringing you to this very interesting opportunity. My question to you is, how was Blackness regarded at that time in Spain, in Italy, and in general in the world? Because I understand that at some point in time, at the initiation of the slave trade to America, there was some religious justification for it, thinking of Blackness as inferiority, which did not exist before.
Mhm.
It was maybe a Protestant thing, and since Protestantism initiated those years, I wonder how much that influence. It doesn't seem to have influenced so much yet. That's right.
Mhm. So that's a great great question. Um, a lot of my way of looking at it was influenced by Jonathan Schorsch's book on Jews and blacks in the early modern world, and he does uncover even a medieval tradition of this kind of discrimination based on color. So I think there is a lot of that in this period. I think that what skews it for Reubeni is the fact that they are really wanting powerful Jews. And that is the way Reubeni portrays himself. And I think the Christians on some level are doing the same with Dawit II, that they their prejudices are at least partially swept to the side because they see this huge political advantage of an alliance. So with Reubeni, his black skin, he makes his black skin an asset, even in a period where I can say that in most contexts it would not be an asset. Um, uh, and he does that through this, connecting with myth, these myths of the lost tribes. But I think that my main part of the answer is still Jonathan Schorsch's book goes into that in a lot of detail.
Alejandro David Walks. David.
Oh, and
Gracias. Shall I ask this in English and then translate it into Spanish, or cómo lo hago? Lo hago en español y
en
luego lo
English
traduzco en inglés.
La gente lo ve
¿Todo
con
inglés?
subtítulos.
Okay, vale. So thank you. This is, I've already read the book, and this is a great live experience, as a compliment, and made me think of some new things. But the one thing I really want to ask you is sort of your opinion or your conjecture as to where this guy was from and what he was about and what was his deal, right? He's speaking Hebrew, which we know is strange. He's darker, he's blackish, maybe.
Yeah.
Shahorhor.
Yeah.
What do you think his real story might have been? Do you think he was from the Arabian Peninsula?
It's a really hard story a hard question to answer. There's a wonderful novel by Max Brod, the sort of, he's more known as the literary executor of Franz Kafka. It's called Prince Reubeni, and he imagines that David Reubeni is a Jew from Prague, so an Ashkenazi Jew, and he's affected by pogroms in Prague. And so he feels that in order to save the Jews, he has to do something which is ethically inappropriate. And he ends up in Italy and he talks to Machiavelli and he adopts this whole approach. And that's how Max Brod saw it. Now, how do scholars see it? One approach has been linguistic analysis, where you look at Reubeni's Hebrew and you try to see traces of his mother tongue. And there have been people who are much better linguists than I am, and they have come to really the conclusion that he spoke every single language, from Ethiopic languages to Yiddish to Slavic languages to Romance to Arabic. And the reason is that it's chaotic. The Hebrew is really chaotic. That was one of the challenges of translation. Getting the gist is easy, but there's not subject-verb agreements, and there are weird words, and it's by someone who really wasn't comfortable with Hebrew. So when people guess everywhere, you can't use his language to figure out where he was from. You also don't know whether that's what may be coming through is the secretary or whoever wrote it down. People say he can't be Abyssinian because he knows such good Hebrew. That's been in some of the literature. And Abyssinian Jews as a whole didn't cultivate knowledge of Hebrew. But there's no reason why a person who's as talented and well-traveled as this couldn't have picked up Hebrew somewhere else, if not in Abyssinia, than elsewhere. I am generally inclined to and some people say he's Yemenite. Why? Because he speaks Hebrew, and Yemenite Jews are known as A, being darker, and B, having very good knowledge of Hebrew. Could be. It's just that it's speculative. I don't think an answer is possible. But and I don't think we'll ever know. My very tentative feeling is that he likely is from Africa. And that's simply because you have these diplomats who say that he looks Abyssinian. And if I'm to guess, I sort of trust that, but it has to be a very tentative kind of trust. Does that sort of answer the question? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I know, historians usually don't like to do too much speculation. I find it entertaining. And also just somebody like you who has sat with the sources for so long, I imagined you must have been entertaining some kind of theory.
Yeah. I should add that contemporary Ethiopian Jews, at least some, embrace him as one of their own. Now that doesn't mean anything historically, because they don't have a historic tradition of doing that, but they've chosen to embrace him in the contemporary period.
Héctor, ¿puede ser que había levantado la mano?
Sí, sí,
Aquí.
gracias. Professor, thank you for your conference. It's very, very interesting. But what was when he disappeared, when he faded off, and how?
So 1538 is the date that scholars that scholars give. It's not clear. A lot of the earlier scholarship seemed convinced that he was burnt at the stake. It's no longer that, and that's in fact what I wrote in the book. I spoke to some other people who feel that it's not actually that clear that he may have been pardoned and let go on his way. So there seems to be some kind of ambiguity in the sources, but we definitely don't see him after 1538.
Okay, thank you. Is it possible that this was the matter of Othello?
A matter of
Shakespeare's Othello?
Sorry, I don't.
The character.
Yes.
Character.
Yes. Sorry, I totally
a black general.
Yes.
A black general who appears on nobody knows where from, and is very, very far. But a black general in Venice it's a legend. And is there any connection possible?
So I don't know about to Othello, that particular example, but this is the age of these sort of ambassadors from nowhere. You have a huge number of them making their way to various courts in this early modern period. And the general approach of the courts is pretty much what we see with Reubeni, that people are willing to place small bets on them and sort of wait and see as to how they shake out.
Yeah.
And there are a few black figures who we know about who come through Europe in this period, although it is unusual. The connection to Othello, I don't know. I'd have to think more about it, but I wouldn't think that there would be a connection.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
Muy linda idea, Héctor.
yes,
Yeah.
it was the first idea who came into my mind. That came into my mind.
I will take a look into it. I think it's interesting. Yeah.
Alan, el profesor Verskin, es la misma época que cuando tú hablabas de los portugueses, es la misma época del milenarismo del padre Antonio Vieira.
And that and
El de-
oh yeah, okay. No, that's not a dimension. What connection do you see?
o sea, está milenarismo portugués.
Mhm.
En esta época, creo, el padre Vieira era un milenarista, este, Antonio Vieira, muy importante del pensamiento milenarista portugués.
So I recognize his name. I haven't gone into him in detail. Uh, the context that I've really looked for is in the court of Manuel, the father of João, where it's really animating Portuguese policy, and supposedly once Manuel dies, it wanes, its importance wanes within the court. But as we see with Reubeni, it hasn't waned completely in the 1520s. But I think for Reubeni, what makes his message work is that he speaks a millenarianism that is understandable to Jews and Christians, even to some extent Muslims. And the whole region is saturated with it. There's a wonderful article by Sanjay Subrahmanyam, where he goes systematically through all the courts of Europe, some of the Muslim courts too, including the Safavids, and into India. And he finds similar versions of this belief that they're in the end times and that there's some figure coming to save them. And Reubeni is able to talk generally enough that he can fit the image of all of these different people. So unfortunately, I don't have anything more to say about your example, but these courts are people. This is what people are talking about, and Reubeni.
En tu, en tu libro, en tu libro mencionas que Reubeni era un pendenciero, muchas peleas, un- una personalidad conflictiva
Mhm.
del tipo, no sé, yo recordaba Caravaggio, ¿no? Esto de que Caravaggio,
Mhm.
¿no? Que se peleaba, ¿no? Eso me impresionó mucho en tu libro, un factor autodestructivo parecido a Sabbatai Tzvi estas esta cuestión también que habla Gershon Scholem, estos mesías que son depresivos, pendencieros, peleadores, ¿no?
So with Shabbatai Tzvi and Gershom Sholom's idea is that he is bipolar disorder, um, and Shabbatai Tzvi comes over a century after Reubeni. To some extent, I think you can say that both of them are not mentally well, right? There are good arguments for seeing that for seeing that. The main difference that I see is that Reubeni is more politically aware, that he has a concrete political plan for saving the Jews, whereas Shabbatai Tzvi seems to be more mystical to me. In terms of Reubeni's personality, the anger is what really stands out. And he says that that is his biggest character flaw. I don't know enough about Shabbatai Tzvi, but I felt that it was something different. For Shabbatai Tzvi, it seems that there are these periods where he is debilitated and he's sort of almost reclusive, and then these other periods of manic activity. So I think the broader question is if you want to be a messianic claimant, what kind of mind state do you have to have? And I think with both there's something different, but I don't think I see them as parallel.
Thank.
May I ask something?
Please.
Samuela.
Okay, thank you. So it was so interesting, and I think you said everything started in Venice. Do you think it was by chance, or is it a city that he chose right because in that moment this was the only place in the world where Jews were enclosed in a ghetto? Do you think is there any connection to it?
I think that he went there just because it was available as the best port to get to Rome. So his goal was Rome. So he went to Venice as the most convenient place, but it was a very good choice for him. And I think it was a good choice because there were these, Kabbalistic bankers, people who had a very strong foot in the real world, which played to his strengths. He needed people with money. He was coming in with none. And so he needed to secure the philanthropists, and Venice was certainly a place to do that. But also people who were open to this kind of Kabbalistic thinking. And it's in Venice that he gets his contacts for Rome. He goes to Rome with letters from bankers in Venice that allow him to meet the De Pisas once he reaches Rome. So I think it's at once the most logical place to get to Rome from. He's sailing from Egypt, so that sort of makes sense of the route. But you're right that it's very fortunate that was the case, because I don't think he would have been as successful otherwise in other places.
Alan,
Yeah.
Reubeni portaba algún tipo de documento escrito que lo autorizaba.
Yes. You want me to talk about the documents? So
Thank.
yes. So Reubeni, most ambassadors, they had gifts to give and wealth to give. That's how they got their place in courts. Reubeni had nothing to trade with. So what he did was he showed his piety. He fasted for weeks on end. He was constantly praying. He abstained from alcohol and women. And so his piety was something that he traded. But he also had this document, which was coming allegedly from the king, his brother of this vast Jewish kingdom, and was signed by all 70 members of the Sanhedrin. That was apparently operational in his brother's kingdom in Arabia. And so that's how he showed that he was showing this document that he was legitimate. Then later he gets thrown in jail, and the document is taken away from him and never returned. We assume it was destroyed. And he felt that that document was so important to his success that he had to get a new one forged. But by the time that happens, his prestige is not the same, and it's harder for him to get Jews who are willing to do that. And he insisted on something rather bizarre. He wanted the signatures of all 70 members of the Sanhedrin on the document. So he was in Mantua at the time, and he starts getting kids. He makes them swear that they won't tell, on fear of curse, and he gets them to sign the document so he will have all 70 signatures. But the kids report to the rabbis who absolve them of their oaths, and the story gets out that he's been forging that particular document. The Duke of Mantua ends up finding out, and it's very possible that that was the beginning of the undermining of his mission. But it's a striking story about the importance of documents to corroborate very unlikely stories in the early modern period, and the risks people would go to in order to have those documents reconstituted. Was that the question? Yeah.
Joseph, welcome. Benvenuto.
Buonasera. Grazie e buonasera a tutti voi. Mi fa piacere essere qui con voi.
Bueno, masterclass.
Thank you.
Masterclass. Guillermo, ¿alguna pregunta? Guillermo de Frankfurt.
No, particularmente. Me quedé pensando
Opinión.
si Sholem o Moshe Idel, por ejemplo, en algún momento menciona a Reubeni. Estaba pensando, eso quería saberlo.
Yes, absolutely. Both Idel and Sholem know about Reubeni. They are a lot less interested in Reubeni than I am. They are more interested in Shlomo Molcho, who is, Reubeni's co-messianic journeyer, or however we're going to call him. And they're more interested in Molcho because Molcho is deeply learned. And Molcho's story is remarkable. He's raised as a Christian, but somehow he writes beautiful Hebrew, and he's familiar with rabbinic literature in a great degree of detail. So they're drawn more to Molcho, whereas Reubeni, who starts it all, is he's a practical man. He's a charismatic figure. He writes this diary, but he isn't interested in working out the theological details. So what I'm trying to do is push more of the focus back onto Reubeni. But there's been a lot of great work on Molcho, including a wonderful biography by Moti Ben Melech on Molcho and his thoughts, from which I've learned a huge amount.
Perdón, quería solamente decir que me da la impresión, Alan mencionaba que obviamente Shabtai Tzvi es muy posterior y Frank también es mucho más posterior. Digamos que Reubeni en realidad está inserto en el contexto en general de la época en cuanto a los anabautistas, por ejemplo, ¿no? En Alemania, por ejemplo, todo el misticismo también cristiano, milenarismo cristiano, ¿no? Eso que también mencionaba Pablo, ¿no? Por ejemplo, en Portugal, pero también en Alemania, en Holanda, o sea, en Países Bajos. Me da la impresión que digamos que Reubeni es realmente un hijo de la época, ¿no?
So I didn't entirely get the whole question, but I think you were talking about the Reformation context,
Right.
of Reubeni.
Yes,
and
yes.
that is very much, I think that is very much there, in the sense that I think you have parallel figures to Reubeni a few years earlier among people in the Reformation. So, for example, the Peasants' Revolt,
Yes.
the peasants and Thomas Munster is, I
Yes,
think,
yes, Hans von Linden.
yeah, absolutely. So I think that that is the same kind of model, that there are these people who have an apocalyptic dimension, but the Peasants' Revolt is also something very concrete. It relates to socio-political concerns, but it's done with this apocalyptic vocabulary. So I see Reubeni as that kind of very much that kind of figure. So when you say he's a kind of a product of his epoch, I think that there are a lot of figures like that. The more complicated question is whether Reubeni was familiar, particularly with what was going on in Germany, and that I don't know. I feel that it's in the air. I feel he must have on some level, but I can't document it.
Alan,
Yeah.
los hombres, los seguidores, entiendo que Reubeni tenía un grupo, la patrulla perdida, digamos, ¿no? Un grupo como un ejército fantasma, no sé, de García Márquez. Em, pero estaban armados, la pregunta es si este ejército estaban armados, estaban efectivamente armados, tenían armas, estaban pertrechados con armas, estaban armados los hombres de Reubeni.
So is the question whether his army got weapons? Is that sorry?
Sí, 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 si era un ejército, si eran, no sé,
So
partisanos.
so he never gets the weapons delivered that he wants. What he's doing is very much what Theodor Herzl is doing. That if you read Theodor Herzl's diary, he's saying, look at that person over there, that Jew over there. He looks like he would do well in an army. He's a strong man, or he has a particular kind of technical expertise. And Reubeni, like Herzl, is sizing people up. And like Herzl, he has very little to trade with. So he never gets those weapons, but he does end up with a very belligerent group of people. So when they're in Portugal, for example, they're picking fights with everyone. There are fist fights. There's some knife fights. They get thrown in jail. Reubeni has to argue for the.
Lo Caravaggio, lo Caravaggio.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But he never gets the real military weapons, and perhaps even more importantly, he wants military experts to be sent along. And he doesn't get those either. So it's a failed story, but it works for these negotiations work for over a decade, and people are willing to fund his entourage. These parties are funded by Jewish donors and by Christian donors, but the weapons don't come.
Fantástico.
Thank God.
El party. Sí, Alberto.
Gracias, Pablo, gracias, David. Una hermosísima, Alan, una hermosísima charla. Estaba pensando dos cosas. En relación a Sabbatai Sevi, pongamos, según Gershom Scholem y Moshe Idel, tenía su profeta. Uno podría pensar que Solomon Moshe podría ser el profeta de Reubeni. Entonces, tal vez ahí hay alguna pista acerca de las intenciones de Reubeni, porque me hizo acordar un poquito a lo que también mencionó Jaime acerca de Otelo. Yo estaba recordando a Coriolanus, que fue a buscar ayuda a otro reino para imponerse en el reino de él. O sea, él no podía imponerse por sí mismo por simpatía o votación local, pero fue a buscar apoyo extranjero para regresar y tomar el control de su lugar. Entonces ahí podría haber una historia también un poco de las idas y vueltas de él consiguiendo armas, intrigando y proponiendo volver a Medio Oriente. Eso nada más. Muchas gracias, Pablo, y gracias, Alan.
Thank you.
Muy shakespeariano, mucho Shakespeare, bien.
Sí, sí, sí.
I didn't entirely, I'm
Que
sorry.
Coriolano era un traidor, era tenido por un traidor, ¿no? Como la figura del traidor,
Claro,
¿no? Va,
en Roma,
Mm-hmm.
recuerdo.
sí, sí. En Roma, en el siglo segundo antes de Cristo, más o menos, como era un general bastante hábil, algunos senadores vieron la oportunidad de transformarlo en senador a él también. Pero él tenía que conseguir el apoyo del pueblo hablando en las plazas. Y él despreciaba al pueblo, le llamaba cicatrices o scars, gusanos. Entonces nunca consiguió eso, pero él quería ser fuerte políticamente. Entonces, viendo que no podía, se fue al reino de los volscos,
Sí,
rivales de los romanos, y le dijo, si ustedes me apoyan, yo les entrego Roma. Entonces, cuando regresó a Roma, la mamá le dijo, lo que está haciendo está muy mal. Él desistió, regresó con los volscos y los volscos le mataron. Yo decía, tal vez alguien como David Reubeni, tan belicoso, tan proclive a las armas y promoviendo llevar armas a Medio Oriente, tal vez él tendría una forma de querer conquistarse esa zona para sí mismo. Entonces, tal vez ahí Shlomo Mocho podría haber dicho algo acerca de su desilusión con quien creyó que era un Mesías. Tal vez la literatura de Mocho ayuda a ver también las intenciones verdaderas de Reubeni. Eso es lo que más o menos la idea.
Uh-huh.
Gracias, Pablo. Gracias, Alan.
Thank you so much. I think I couldn't entirely get that, just but I think that the issue of Reubeni's intentions is
Ujú.
a very crucial one. And the early scholars of Jewish studies who really discovered him as a figure thought of him as a bad guy and a trickster. So there's Poznansky, who was a leading scholar of the Karaites, said the only thing that you can learn from Reubeni's story is how miserable Jews were, that they would have believed this obviously false person who was a braggart and wanted nothing but to throw parties for himself and his friends. So they saw him as taking advantage of poor Jews because he wanted a life of adventure. I see him as differently. I see him as playing a very dangerous game in very desperate times. That Jews are forcibly converted; they're being chased hither and thither, uh, and and he thought that by provoking this world war, he might weaken Christian powers, and Jews might end up leading better lives after that. If he'd succeeded, it would have been disastrous. I have to be clear on that. This is a person who is calling for world war. And I have spent so much time with Reubeni that I deeply love him as a character. I think that comes across. But I do have to take a step back and say, when push comes to shove, this is a person who saw the solution to Jewish suffering as as being alleviated through a world war between the strongest Christian powers and the strongest Muslim power of the day, and that is bad. um, but the issue of intentions is interesting, and I don't know. I see him as I do see him as genuine. I think of him as dangerous but genuine.
Ahí se ve en la historia de Reubeni una tensión en esa época entre las aspiraciones revolucionarias, apocalípticas, milenaristas y las comunidades diaspóricas, las comunidades, las keilás, las comunidades diaspóricas con esa perspectiva, porque hay un enfrentamiento, ¿no? De Reubeni con las comunidades italianas, ¿no? Hay una tensión entre las aspiraciones de Reubeni y la vida comunitaria judía diaspórica, ¿no?
Um, Sorry. Uh, so you're seeing a tension between
The
Reubeni
tension between,
Reubeni's ambitions and diasporic life.
claro, communities like Keilas, no sé, con Reubeni.
So very much so. We have some documentation of rabbis who opposed Reubeni, and one of them is Azriel of Vienna, a very prominent Italian rabbi, and he writes a responsum against Reubeni, where he says, here's this adventurer who is using every Jewish community through which he passes as his own personal piggy bank, as his own bank account. And he says that this has to stop. And Reubeni's response is, I think, something to do with would be something like the tensions you're describing, that there are rabbinic authorities who have charge over Jewish lives, and then there's a Jewish king who has a different kind of power, a different way of ordering Jews with a different kind of authority. And so it's those two different molds of authority that I think are there: rabbinic authority, which is weaker, and royal authority of a Jewish king, which is stronger. But it is absolutely destructive of Jewish communal life, as has every messianic claimant in history. This is a backdoor to chaos within Jewish history, the messianic idea. And false messiahs existed before Reubeni, and they certainly existed after. So I'm not sure I got the finer point of your question. I'm sorry, but that's yeah.
No, perfecto.
Okay.
Perfecto. Joseph, ¿alguna demanda? Joseph, no se te oye si estás hablando. Y si puede ser en inglés, porque el italiano creo que no sé si.
No se
oye.
escucha.
Bueno, acá está, tenemos.
Ahí
Joseph,
Guillermo
no
tiene una pregunta.
has muteado. Ah, Guillermo.
Sí, permiso, ¿eh?
Sí, Guillermo, por favor.
Sí. El asunto de presentarse como un
Now you hear me?
Reubenite.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
So
wait.
once
then.
again, I'm
Hi.
very happy to be part of this seminar. Unfortunately, I entered too late. Probably I mistaken the hours. As I thought it was 8 o'clock, and I understand it was 7. So it wouldn't be correct on my part to make questions. If at all, I would have made questions about more complicated issues, because I'm more close to our very days, namely rabbinical authority and messianic tendencies. It's not a question about Reubeni, it's a question if this distance you mentioned, Pablo, between the communities and the messianic views of Reubeni, and the nice answer about Italian Rabbi Diana, that Ellen gave echo. Can it gives us some notion, clarification about how come that during the year 1666, no rabbi had the courage to speak against the dreams of Shabtai Tzvi, and consequently, how comes that from 23 to 25, 2023, 2025, very few rabbis had the courage to confront the terrific messianic ideas of some parties in the Israeli society. But this is not a question about the conference. It's a more a feeling that I feel I have to express. So excuse me if I took this opportunity. But if Alan has something to say about it, I'll be happy to hear. Thank you.
I will say something about it.
Thank you.
So I think that either Reubeni or his supporters are sensitive to rabbinic ideas of Mashiach. And I think that the idea that is operative here is an idea of Rambam, of Maimonides, where, and I actually had the passage in my, I'll share the presentation one more time just to show, because I like this text so much and I skipped it.
Thank you.
Maimonides in his time was battling messianic movements that were very destructive, particularly in Yemen. So he had a problem with messianic figures being very, very charismatic and doing magic tricks and claiming to perform miracles and winning over followers. So he developed an idea of a deflationary Messiah, a boring Messiah who, before he does anything, checks the halacha, gets permission from the rabbis, and so on and so forth, before he does these very destructive messianic things, because messiahs are revolutionary figures, and that's what they do. So in the Mishneh Torah, we have this line from Rambam, which says, "Do not think that the king Messiah will have to perform signs and wonders or bring anything into being, revive the dead, or do similar things. It is not so. If there arise a king from David's house who meditates on the Torah, observes the commandments, and fights the battles of the Lord, it may be assumed that he is the Messiah. If he does these things and succeeds, rebuilds the temple on its site, and gathers the dispersed of Israel, he is beyond all doubt the Messiah. Let no one think that in the days of the Messiah, any of the laws of nature will be set aside. The world will follow its normal course." So the idea, I think, that Maimonides had was that you would decrease messianic activity, because most of these messianic figures were claiming to do miracles. They weren't doing the practical work of redemption. They weren't doing the practical work of redemption. Now, I think what Reubeni did was he said, challenge accepted. I'm going to be the boring Messiah that Maimonides predicted. He always says he's just a general. He's not got a direct contact with God. He's just going to take the Jews to the land of Israel and rebuild the temple. So I think that is a very rabbinic, I mean, at least it's a very Maimonidean idea. And I'm scared to answer your question about 2023 to 2025, but I think it is worth noting that among contemporary messianic, not messianic Jews, not Christians, but among religious Jews who believe that we're in the times of Mashiach, many of them, at least the Zionist ones, use Maimonides' text because it does check all of the boxes. It is miracles haven't been performed, but concrete steps have been made to give Jews autonomy and set up the building of the temple. So rabbinic texts rabbis can work in a variety of ways. They can denounce messiahs, but even unintentionally, they can support certain kinds of messianic figures, and I think Reubeni is one of them. So I don't know.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mine was more sociological, rabbinical, sociological question. I mean, what brings them into real courageous, if I may say, confront about reality and religion, and what instead, I mean.
Bueno, yo digo, Joseph Yosef es el rabino actual más importante, uno de los reinos más importantes de Italia, de Firenze, es el rabino capo di
Ah,
Firenze.
thank you
Wow.
for coming.
Grazie.
Un sabio, un jajam. Guillermo,
Muchas gracias. Um,
Grazie mille.
en inglés.
so, Professor Alan Verskin, the question for you is, if he chose to be considered a Reubenite, did he mention what particularity, being of the lost tribe of Reuben, uh, he brought with him, like, or why Reuben and not any of the other the 9 lost tribes? The thing I can think of is that Reuben was the elder son
Mhm.
of Jacob. I don't know, but or was there in that period any particularity in Jewish either Kabbalah or other type of traditions, or ways of thinking, uh, about the Reuben itself or himself, or the tribe of Reuben, that made him introduce himself as a member of that tribe?
So that is a good question. There are a couple texts. I am unfortunately going to have to send them to you because they're in my notes. I don't remember them. But there is some messianic thought that the redemption will begin with the reemergence of the tribe of Reuben. But it's in my notes, and unfortunately, I don't have it here. But it's you're right. I mean, normally when you talk about a Davidic line, you're not talking about the tribe of Reuben there at
That's right.
all. Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question.
Está muteado, Pablo.
Decía, pobre Alan, no sé si estamos abusando de su tiempo. Si alguien quiere preguntar algo más, pero lo queremos liberar a Alan,
Oh,
si
I'm
no va a
happy
ser
to
el
hear.
siervo sufriente. Bueno, we want Reubeni now y nos vemos una sobresaliente clase. Quedamos cautivados, francamente cautivados por la conferencia, el plot de Netflix, o no sé, pero fantástico,
Well,
fantástico,
thank you so
fantástico.
much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. It's wonderful to be able to share Reubeni with this audience.
Ahí está.
Thank you.
Gracias, muchas gracias a
Thank you very much.
todos, sobre todo al
Thank
profesor
you.
Alan, y a todos, como siempre, estas reuniones son muy, muy Amish.
Hamish, sí.
Amish.
Thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Grazie,
Thank
grazie
you very much.
mille.
Grazie mille.